Hi. Hey everyone. Hey David and Sabiha. Just kind of going into this presentation, which is I find really on topic with what's happening in the market. I have a lot of appraisal contacts, and they're saying like the appraisals that are coming through for power of sale proceedings is kind of really on the up. So I think that this is like very much on point with what's happening in the market. Just that's my little side note.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tara, for that little piece of information. 100% true. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining in. We have our infamous David Korman with us, enlightening us on this topic, which is properties under power of sale. It would have been, I think, an extremely hot topic had buyers not kind of gained into the market just because of the mortgage rate increases and how last year people did buy houses that became a little bit unaffordable for them actually the year before, because the mortgage rates hiked right after extremely increased market prices. And there is a lot of people that are feeling the pinch right now that purchased properties in 2021. So this is something which is going to be, we're going to see, I think, quite a bit of it unless something happens to the mortgage rates, which I don't think is going to happen anytime soon. I mean, they might go down just a little tad, but not to where they were in 2021 when people bought extremely expensive priced homes. So David, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sabiha, for that introduction. And thank you, Tara, for giving us a great introduction to this topic as well. So like, Sabiha's bang on with the reason why this, and Tara too, like for why this is sort of a good topic to have, because we're going to see more properties being sold under power of sale, and it's strictly a function of the interest rates going up. So, people, that bought properties in the last couple of years when the rates were historically low and they're paying, like 2% and less on mortgage interest rates. And now it's 3 years later, it's 5 years later, and they're up for renewal. So they're renewing now at 6% or 7%, and some are going to be coming in and maybe it'll go up higher, but it's certainly a big difference. So that puts some people in a predicament, and they can't afford the properties that they're in. So, if they can't afford the mortgages, they might default on their mortgages, and the lender is going to sell the property potentially. And that's where we're going to see an increase. You never know for sure the timing, but we're already seeing some of it in the marketplace. So the reason why, you as a realtor have to pay attention to this, because some of you may be familiar with helping a client buy a property under power of sale. Some of you are not sure what to do, but I'm not going to convince you in this webinar that you should be doing it or you shouldn't be doing it. What I want to explain to you is, if you're going to do it, that there are differences between a transaction when you're buying under power of sale and a normal resale transaction. So there are some benefits. I would tell anybody, don't discount it. You should consider it, but you just have to consider it, but understand the differences so that you can explain it to your buyer clients. So something else I'm going to circle back at the end of this, after I go through the presentation, is the question, like some people think, oh, if I buy a private sale, there's a real bargain. I can get it at a reduced price or something like that. There's bargain opportunities. And the answer is sometimes that is true, but I'll always argue that sometimes you're not getting the bargain that a buyer really thinks that they're getting. But again, that doesn't mean they shouldn't do it. You should just understand the differences and what are the factors that come into play to make this a good idea for some buyers and sometimes not such a good idea for others. And sometimes they might be getting exactly what a fair market price might be at the end of the day, and we'll go into why that'll be. So that's my long-winded introduction. I'm going to skip through some of our intro slides on here, because most of you, I think, are familiar with our practice by now. Hopefully you are. and you know where to find us and how to find us. But this is the one slide I can never skip over to show not me, the other David, who carries me on our podcasts week after week. We just recorded our 87th episode yesterday, which I think was a really, really interesting one, with an agent named Holly Carroll. That'll be coming out probably beginning next week. I think you'd find it interesting list. It's really talking about cottage properties, but it's her story, her personal story, that is really interesting and motivating and inspiring. So please check out these podcasts. Sometimes it's just good information. We did one on power of sale probably a month ago or something, which said, okay, you know, Dave said, you know, we should do a webinar for the office too on it. But you can always find a lot of really good materials if you just, you know, look in, you know, go to you know, the YouTube site. You can watch it. If you go to the Kormans, just search Kormans. We have our YouTube channel, or you can get a podcast wherever you can. You can look at the table of contents, pick and choose what you want to watch and listen to. And please send us suggestions for episodes or topics or guests or anything. We'd love to hear from you. So let's get to what we're talking about here. So first thing, before I even get into this first slide, just by general background, is a lender, whether it's an institutional lender, private lender, gives someone a mortgage on their house so they can acquire their property or refinance their property. It doesn't matter. And the mortgage says, you can have my money as long as you pay me interest at this amount and you don't default on that, and as long as you keep your property insured and you don't destroy your property, you wouldn't be in default. So you can have my money. But if you do default, the mortgage says that the lender has the right to sue you as the borrower to get the money back. But they also have the right to sell the property in order for them to recover their money. So when they're selling the property, they're selling it under a power of sale. That's where it comes from. Okay, that's where the term comes from. And it comes right from the Mortgages Act, and usually right in the terms of the mortgage itself, that says the lender has the right to sell the property. So when they do sell the property under power of sale, they're going to be basically cleaning the title for the buyer, whoever's going to buy it, because the power of sale process itself will discharge not only their mortgage from title, but any mortgages or other encumbrances that are registered after them will also get removed from title for the most part by this process. Okay, so because everybody's mortgage is going to get discharged, so if there's a first mortgage on it and the first mortgagee is selling under power of sale, but there's a second mortgage on it, maybe a third mortgage even on the property, those second and third mortgages are going to get discharged by the registration of the transfer under power of sale. They're going to come off title. But the first mortgage lender, whoever's selling this property, is still going to have to account to anybody that has an interest in the property. So they can only take what's owing to them under their mortgage for their principal, their interest, their legal fees for dealing with it, their appraisal costs, anything else they put into the property, if they paid property taxes or whatever, they can recover all that. But after they do that, then they have to account to anybody else that has an interest in the property. Whatever, with the leftover money, then it goes to the second mortgage holder, and then there might be money for the third mortgagee, or maybe they don't get all their money back. And they have to account back to the actual owner of the property, who has now had the property sold from under them, because maybe they had equity still in the property. So because of that, the lender has an obligation when they sell the property to take reasonable precautions to obtain a true market value for the property when they sell it. Okay. Now, the lender generally will get 2 appraisals or more, because they want to have something in their file to just, in case they get challenged, because they can be challenged by any subsequent mortgage holder and the owner themselves, anybody else that could have had an interest in this property, to say, did you get a proper value for this? So if a first mortgage lender is owed $700,000 on a $1 million property and the fair market value is $1 million, he can't just put it on the market and say, look, if I get my 700,000 out plus interest and penalties, so I sell it for 750, I'm happy, I'm out, and screw everybody behind me. You can't do that. If the fair market value is $1 million, then he's got to try and sell it for $1 million and have evidence that he made efforts to sell it for that. And then if he does get $1 million, he could take his 7 or 750, whatever he's owed, and then the 250 that's left over will go to whoever's next in line to recover money. Okay, but they have to show that they took reasonable efforts, reasonable precautions to get a true market value. So usually they're going to do a couple appraisals to make sure they've got that in their file to justify it in case they're challenged. Okay, and they'll usually establish the sale price based on the higher values. So they also have to be very careful about who they're selling to, because part of their obligation is to expose the property to the open market. So it always makes sense for a lender to list it on a multiple listing service and expose it to the market, just to protect themselves from being challenged. Like, did you go to reasonable efforts to sell it, or you just take the first offer? So usually a lender's not going to sell it to someone saying, hey, you know what, I heard you're about to put this up for sale. I'll buy it from you. How much do you want? Oh, you want $1 million? Okay, I'll give you $1 million, because it exposes the lender to a challenge. Say, why did you accept that offer? We're in an economy right now where there's a market where there's multi-offer bids. Even though it's really worth $1 million, if you exposed it on a MLS, you may have had multiple offers. Maybe the price would have got pushed up to $1.1 million, and there'd be an extra $100,000 for somebody behind the first mortgage lender. So they have to be careful when they're doing it. They want to get fair market value. They want to go through a proper process, because oftentimes a lender will be challenged on this. So they have to have the backup for their file. Now, the concept of redemption is a really important one for you to understand when a property is being sold under power of sale. So the Mortgages Act itself says that the mortgagor, who's the borrower, the owner of the property, can redeem at any time before the sale under the mortgage. So the sale effectively means when the agreement of purchase sale is entered into. So what that means is lender is going to sell it under power of sale. Lender is given notice to everybody, we're selling it under power of sale. He's marketing the property. They can sign an agreement of purchase and sale. The agreement's closing on April 27, 2023, with a bona fide buyer paying fair market value. They've done everything correctly. Okay. If the owner shows up that day or the day before and say, hey, here's your check, lender, I've got all the money, all your interest, all your penalties, all your legal costs, the whole balance, here it is, certified funds, that effectively kills the bona fide agreement of purchase and sale that was signed between the lender and some third-party buyer that was supposed to close. So that's really important for you to know as a realtor, because if you're acting for the buyer of a property, they might get a great deal, they might like the deal, they might love the house, everything's moving towards closing, they got all their financing done, they got their movers booked and everything, and at the last minute, the owner of the property redeems and shows up with their money. That effectively kills the agreement of purchase and sale. Okay, and your client doesn't get the property. Okay, now that, you know, the Mortgages Act usually says that they can redeem any time before the property is sold, which means when an agreement is entered into. But usually there's language right in the agreement of purchase and sale when a property is sold under power of sale that allows the lender to accept a redemption right up to the time of closing. Okay, and that's usually a standard clause that'll go in a power of sale. It's usually in a Schedule C that'll have special provisions, and I'll get into that a little bit more. Now, this right to redeem extends beyond the owner of the property. Okay, a subsequent encumbrance or the second mortgage lender could say, hey, I don't want the first mortgage lender to sell us under power of sale. I lose control. I might not get all my money. I'm going to put the first mortgage lender in good standing. I'm going to pay everything out on the first mortgage, and I'll take over their position and I'll get control of the property. So the concept of redemptions, a really important one for you to understand and for you to be able to explain to a buyer that they're, even they sign a bona fide agreement, they've done everything, conditions waived, everything is moving, the property could be redeemed, and that kills, it terminates your agreement of purchase and sale with the buyer. So there is that risk associated with buying under power of sale, okay, which is one of the things you have to know about and be able to explain. Okay, now, who is the actual seller when an agreement of purchase sale is entered into? And, because that's really important. So the seller is not John Smith, who's the registered owner of the property. In your agreement of purchase and sale, and you might be on the buyer side of this, but the seller stated in the agreement of purchase and sale will be the name of the lender. It might be Toronto Dominion Bank, that was the first mortgage lender. They're the ones selling the property. If that's the case, it'll say the seller shall be Toronto Dominion Bank under power of sale. Okay, they're the party selling it. They have the right to sell it. Okay, so you should just know that. So the other thing that's really important to know, okay, the redemption's really critical. The second thing that's really critical to know is when a property is being sold at power of sale, it's always being sold on an as-is basis, as is, where is condition. The seller, who's the lender, it's not John Smith that owns the property, it's the seller is the lender. The lender hasn't lived in the property. The lender doesn't know about all the defects in the property and all the warts of the property. So the lender is saying, I'm going to sell you this property, but you're buying it as is. I'm not giving you any information because I don't really know. So I'm not going to give you a representation or a warranty for anything. Okay, all I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you, and this is all what goes into that Schedule C, which is a pretty standard language, that there'll be a Schedule C in any agreement of purchase and sale that's going to have standard power of sale clauses. Okay, and it's going to say the buyer is going to accept this title pursuant to the Mortgage Act. We have the right to sell you pursuant to the Mortgage Act because there's a default in the mortgage, so that gives us the right to sell it, and they're complying with the Mortgage Act in terms of selling it. There'll be a description of the property, but there'll be no abatement for the purchase price if there was a misdescription. The seller, which is again the lender, is the seller. They're going to say, well, we will give you a statutory declaration as the evidence that there actually was a default under the mortgage, which gives the seller the right to sell the property. So we will give that as part of the closing documents. But when you get title, you're going to get it subject to whatever subdivision agreements, easements, utilities, rights of way, encroachment. If it's a condo, it's subject to whatever the condominium declaration, the bylaws. If there's special assessment lawsuits, we don't care. Buyer's going to buy it subject to any of that. We're not cleaning up any of that. Okay, your lawyer can requisition us all day long to fix all that stuff. We don't have no obligation to do that. Okay, and any buyer is going to have to agree to these terms. So the buyer has to strictly rely on their own inspection of the property. If it's a condo, they're going to rely on the status certificate being reviewed by their lawyer. But whatever's there, whatever you find, whatever the defects are and the warts are, you're gonna accept those things. So you have to know that going in. Okay, you're not going to be able to negotiate out of those things. There's some other things. There's a continuation of what's usually in Schedule C. So the buyer is going to accept the property as is and assume any work orders, deficiency notices, or zoning infractions, if there are any. The good news for that is, because no buyer really wants to assume that, what we would do in practical terms is we arrange for title insurance coverage. So we don't even actually make inquiries whether there are work orders or deficiency notices or zoning infractions. We just buy a title insurance policy or get the buyer to buy a title insurance policy. If it turns out after closing that there were work orders that we didn't know about, they've got coverage for that because we've arranged for title insurance. Okay, but the point you should know is there's no recourse back against the seller for any of these things, because the seller again is the lender, and the lender doesn't know if there's any problems with it. So we're also going to get no rep or warranty from the seller about, are there retaining walls, are there fences, encroachments, the soil condition, urea, formaldehyde, foam insulation, any other environmental matters. They're not giving us any rep or warranty because they don't know, and they don't want to be involved in that. Now, there'll also be a clause in the Schedule C that will give the seller, who's the lender, the right to terminate the agreement of purchase and sale if an injunction application is brought, because there might be one of the parties that's an interest in it. It might be the owner, it might be a second or third mortgage lender or somebody else that's trying to block this because for whatever reason, and they bring a court application or injunction. So if they do that, the seller has the right to terminate the agreement, purchase and sale if something like that happens. Okay, they also have the right, as I mentioned before, to terminate the agreement if the mortgagor, who's the registered owner, or any other interested party redeems prior to closing. So again, that right to redeem, it extends not just the owner, but the second mortgage lender, the third mortgage lender could redeem, the spouse of the borrower could redeem because they get notice of this as well. So there's other parties that could redeem, put the mortgage back good standing. If they do that, the agreement, the purchase sale is terminated. Okay. Usually there'll be a clause in Schedule C that the buyer is going to assume any tenancies. So it's not going to be subject to negotiation where you say, well, there's a tenant there. My buyer client wants the tenant out. So seller, do you agree to give notice to the tenant, get them out? Buyer wants it for their own purposes. Buyer wants to move in. They're just simply going to say no. They're going to say, buy the property, close. After you close, you can take whatever steps you want to get rid of the tenant. But we're not cooperating. We're TD Bank, and we don't want to do that. So you're going to buy it and assume any existing tenancies. So that's an important thing, because if there are tenancies, you can't get rid of the tenant with the cooperation of the seller like you would in a normal resale, where you might be able to do that. You might be able to give notices in advance. Here they're saying, close your transaction, do what you want with the tenants afterwards, leave the seller out of it. Fixtures and chattels. Normally we want to put a clause in that the seller represents and warrants that the chattels and fixtures are in good working order and good working condition, or they'll be in good working condition at the time of closing. You're not going to get anything like that negotiated in here. As a matter of fact, there'll be a clause in Schedule C that says you're buying those chattels and fixtures as is, where is, with no rep and warranty. Not only that, the seller is going to say, we're not even sure if we have the right to sell you the chattels. We're not even sure who owns the chattels. We don't know if the chattels are subject to a financing agreement, or if the registered owner really owns them. But whatever interest we have in those chattels will pass on to you, but we're not going to give you a rep or warranty that we even have the right to do that. So another difference between a normal transaction, a power sale transaction. Usually there'll be a provision in the schedule as well that gives the selling lender the option to extend the closing for up to 90 days in case some issues come up. So again, that's a potential real inconvenience to your buyer clients. So if you can negotiate that out, great. Most of the time, you're not going to be able to touch that, and because they want, just in case there's a court application or there's some objection or something, and they have to extend for a period of time, like the seller doesn't want to necessarily kill the deal. They want the option to extend the deal so they can resolve those issues and then still close. So your buyer client has to know that there's this potential that the closing date could be extended. So what happens if they do extend? Where are you going to live for those 90 days? Is there a plan B? So you have to be aware of that too. Now, the schedule will usually say that HST is not included. Usually HST would not be included. We're talking about a resale property. So most of the time, HST would not be applicable because it's one of the exemptions under the Excise Tax Act, that HST isn't payable on the sale of used residential property. But the seller here is not going to give you the normal statutory declaration to back that up, that it's used residential property. So they're saying, I don't know if HST is payable or not payable, but we don't want to play ball. We're not cooperating. We're not going to give a declaration because we don't necessarily know. Now, most of the time it's obvious that it's used residential property. HST wouldn't be applicable. But if the property up for sale is a property that had a substantial renovation done to it, it potentially could be subject to HST, because it wouldn't qualify for the exemption of HST as used residential if it's had a substantial renovation. And I've seen that before. And that's in fact why some properties got to the point where they went power of sale because they borrowed a ton of money to do a major renovation. Things go bad. Sometimes they don't even complete the renovation. They run out of money. They can't get it completed. And now the lender's selling the property. So if you're buying that type of property, you got to be careful there, because it might be that HST is applicable to it, but the seller is not going to help you out with a declaration confirming that it's used residential and not subject to the HST. So if it's a property that has a potential massive renovation, this went on, this is an issue you got to pay attention to, because we got to try and figure out whether HST is payable, because the seller's not going to pay the HST. It's not going to be a price inclusive of HST. It's going to be the buyer's obligation to pay the HST if it's payable. Another major difference in power of sale is what happens post-closing. So in a normal non-power of sale transaction, if certain issues pop up after closing, sometimes there's recourse back to a seller because they may have hidden defects, things like that. And I've done seminars and webinars with this group before, and we talk about latent defects and patent defects and all that. So there's certain things where you might be able to go back after closing as a seller if they had knowledge or they took steps to cover things up. Here, you can't go back after this seller at all because the seller is the lender. So the actual homeowner, John Smith, may have hidden a whole bunch of defects. Maybe he was going to sell the property or buried things and he didn't tell the lender about it, but the lender has no knowledge of these things. And then your buyer client buys it and it turns out there's mold in the wall and they covered it up or something like that. They're buying it as is, where is. They have no right to go back after the seller who's the lender. They have no right to go back after John Smith because he hid these things. So it's buyer beware on those type of things. Okay. So they're buying it as is, where is. There'll also be no adjustment after closing for taxes or utilities. So we do the best we can with, prior to closing as a lawyer to make sure there are no outstanding taxes and utilities are covered, etc. But if it turns out something pops up after closing, there's no recourse. Again, we generally have some title insurance coverage that helps us out with that. So it's not a real issue, but you just should be aware of that. That's a little different from a resale. Now, there are some standard changes that'll usually be done to your standard printed form agreement of purchase and sale. Okay, what I've been talking about so far was Schedule C that's going to be added to it with these specific power of sale clauses. But there will be some other changes that a lender will usually want to make in the pre-printed form. So I'm just pointing a couple of these out here. So if you come across it, you'll see that this isn't unusual for them to cross certain things out from the pre-printed form. So one is in paragraph 8, which is the title search date. They're going to delete the part of the buyer's satisfaction for work orders, deficiency notes. They'll cross that out because, like I mentioned before, they want Schedule C to govern on these things and say, we don't know about work orders. If there are any, that's your problem. And so they'll usually make a change there. In paragraph 10, which is the title clause, they're usually going to take that out altogether because they're going to have a different title clause part of Schedule C. So they're usually just crossing that out. In paragraph 12, which is the inspection clause, they're usually going to cross out the part where the seller's going to deliver any sketch or survey in their possession or control, because this seller is not going to do that. They don't want to be obligated to do that. Even if they have a survey, they don't want to be obligated to do that. Paragraph 14 in the standard printed form is the insurance clause. And they're going to delete most of that section as well, other than the part that says the property is being purchased will remain at the risk of the seller until closing. So they're usually taking out everything else in there. They're going to delete the UFI clause in paragraph 22 because they don't want to provide a rep or warranty that there's UFI in the place, or there might be, there might not be. They don't want to get involved in that. And the other thing you should know is the spousal clause isn't applicable, because even though it was John Smith's property, he's the registered owner and he's married, we don't need the consent of Mrs. Smith to this transaction because it's not John Smith that's selling the property. It's TD Bank that's selling the property. So this TD Bank is not married to anybody, Bank of Montreal or anybody else. There's no spousal consent required. So they usually just be deleting those type of provisions, and they might be crossing it out. So you just be aware that there's some differences and some changes in the pre-printed form. Now, I talked a little bit before about tenants and occupants, and I want to just expand on that a little bit here. The lenders are selling the property. Whatever tenants or occupants are there are there. I mentioned before, they don't want to deal with tenants. What the lender is concerned with a little bit is, in order for them to sell the property, if someone's living there, whether they're a tenant or it's the homeowner, like the registered owner that's there, they need to be able to show the property. They might want to stage the property. They would really want to get vacant possession of this property. So usually a lender, when they're selling under power of sale, unless they've got a tremendous level of cooperation from the owner and maybe from tenants, usually they'll issue a notice of sale and then they'll start a statement of claim in court to sue the owner. And they're really suing for two different things. They want two different orders. One, they want to sue them for any amounts that it ultimately might be owing to them. They may not recover all their money. They may not be able to sell the property under power of sale for whatever reason. So they're going to, because they can just sue them for the recovery of the money. So they're usually saying, you know, we're owed $750,000 plus interest plus cost. You know, they break it all down in a statement of claim. But the other thing they're asking for in a statement of claim is they want the judge to give an order that provides them with vacant possession of the property. And they can then take that order and give it to the sheriff, and the sheriff can go and throw the people out so they get vacant possession of the property. Now, sometimes they want that in time to be able to stage the property, to do showings, etc., because maybe they're not getting cooperation from whoever's living there. Sometimes they just want to make sure they got vacant possession before closing, because they've agreed to provide vacant possession before closing. So they're usually getting a court order to get that as well. Okay. So as most of you probably know, if you've ever dealt with a property, when there's a tenant there, it's really hard to get rid of a tenant. It's landlords are always struggling with getting rid of tenants, even if they're a defaulting tenant. When we're buying properties under power of sale, that's one of the reasons lenders don't want to get involved. They don't want to. They want to leave it to the buyer. You don't want the tenant. You're not buying. That's up to you. Close a transaction. You can go to the residential tenancy board as much as you want till you're blue in the face. Good luck. You can get rid of the tenant if you have the right to. You do it. We don't want to get involved. Okay. So sometimes power of sale, if we've got someone living there, we have to bring in somebody who can bring an application. You got to, and we don't do it in our office. I think you probably know that. We use paralegals or refer to paralegals. You've had some really good sessions in the past of paralegals that do that type of residential landlord and tenant work and can help you with the ins and outs of doing that. But something you're going to have to deal with, or the buyer's going to have to deal with, because you're not going to get any cooperation from the lender. Excuse me. So generally, the buyer's going to take the property subject to leases. There's certain ways that you might be able to get rid of them under the Mortgages Act or Land Titles Act. I'm not going to go into detail here because it really depends on the fact situation, but just you should know it's a pain in the ass. It's a difficult process to do. Now, I also mentioned before about chattels, and the lender doesn't even know if they actually own the chattels. So if it turns out a lender that the owner doesn't own the chattel, maybe they bought their appliances, or maybe it's just the hot water tank or the furnace or something under some sort of financing. So that wouldn't, sometimes there'll be something registered on title. Sometimes the security is registered on title, and that'll have to be dealt with, or it could be cut out. But whoever owns those chattels would have the right to just come in and pull it out if it hasn't been paid for. So the ways of a lender who finances those type of chattels, normally they register under what's called the Personal Property Security Act, which is different from registering it on title under the Registry Act. different process, different act. So anything that's not real estate, if somebody has a security interest in anything that's not real estate, registers that security interest by registering a financing statement under the Personal Property Security Act. So we can do a search there, by name, to see if anybody has a security interest in. And it might be, fly-by-night finance company registered that they have an interest in certain appliances or the hot water tank or a furnace owned by John Smith that's located at this property, and they'll register a financing statement. So if they're the owner of it and John Smith's in default to them too, or he hasn't fully paid for it, they can come into the house and pull that system out because they have the right to do that. Okay, so they're registering notice of security. So something we want to check that out as well. Okay, and a notice of security interest will not be deleted by the registration of a power of sale, because that's registered first. It's not the real estate that they have an interest in. They have an interest in certain chattels that are in the real estate that haven't been fully paid for, so they can pull them out. So a buyer has to be careful and got to ask as much questions as we can, and we do searches under the PPSA, and we try and see if there's anything registered on title as well to see if there is a security interest for those chattels, because either the buyer is going to have to pay that off if they want to keep it, or they have to know that the owner of those chattels is going to pull it out of the property, and it might be their water system, and they got to go get a new water system or a new furnace put in because they're buying a property that doesn't have it because it wasn't owned. So it's not going to be transferred to them. So it's just something we have to be careful with. Okay. Now you could get a court order, to show that if you could show that it was supposed to attach and it was supposed to be there and they didn't have the right to it, so, but it's a process. So you just have to be aware that just because there are certain chattels or fixtures there, we don't necessarily know if they're fully owned or not. So sometimes a good idea if someone's interested in buying a property under power of sale for us to do a search in advance of committing to an agreement, a search of title to see if they registered their notice of security interest on title, and do a search under the Personal Property Security Act to see if there anything like this pops up. Okay. And it might be, and if it does, the lender's not going to get rid of it or do anything about it. It's just that the buyer has to have that knowledge saying, okay, in addition to paying the lender $1 million for this property, I got to go buy a furnace and or an HVAC system and spend another 50 grand or whatever it's going to cost to do that. So they just have to know what they're getting into. Okay. So that's sort of the purpose of it. Construction liens is another thing. So if someone had provided materials or services to a property and doesn't get paid, they have the right to register a construction lien under the Liens Act against that property. So a transfer of title doesn't necessarily delete the construction lien from title, but it could in a couple circumstances. Just another issue that has to be dealt with, because the lien claimant might be claiming priority over some of the mortgage advances. Now, this generally only occurs if the lender was providing advancing funds in stages. It wasn't like they just gave, if it's just acquisition financing and they gave them a $700,000 loan to buy the property, it's fully advanced at the time of closing. This issue doesn't really come up. But let's say the lender was providing them, because the property was being renovated and there was construction going on. The lender says, okay, I'm going to give you a certain amount once you complete this part of it, or I'll give you some money to help you acquire the property, and then I'll give you another $100,000 after you do this part of the renovation, and then I'll give you another advance of another $100,000 after you do this, stage B of the renovation. So they're doing different advances. So if before it was fully advanced, a lien arises because the trades weren't paid, and they put a notice of a lien on it, the lien claimant might be able to claim priority over that mortgage to the extent of monies that haven't been advanced yet, or that were advanced after the lien went on. Anyways, I don't want to complicate.
David, can I ask a quick question? Sorry, I mean, I have a bunch of things that I've been writing on the side, but just related to the last slide, if I may. So usually say when we put an offer in the APS in chattels, we'll actually say what exactly is included, right?
Yep.
And I mean, I've always advised my realtors to put in also HVAC and all components of the HVAC, right? So heating,
Right.
cooling, furnace, and air conditioning. So if it's there and it's been signed on and it's confirmed, accepted offer, then when it goes, when you go in and say some parts of it is removed because it was not
Not owned.
owned or it was
Yep.
whatever it may have been.
Yep.
Do the buyers have still have the same rights as under a regular agreement of purchase and sale where we
No.
can go into title insurance? We don't. Okay.
No, but you should still be trying to list all the chattels, okay, and fixtures like you normally would. But the clause that will usually be put in Schedule C will have some language in it that said, we're only selling you whatever interest there might be in those chattels that are listed, because we don't know for sure if they're owned. So we'll sell you whatever interest we have in them, but we don't really know. So you're bearing that risk.
Right.
Okay?
And Schedule
As a
C
buyer, I
supersedes.
still put it all in. You still put it all in and
Right.
try and get in there. But knowing that even though you put it in there, there's a clause in Schedule C that's going to water that down
Yeah.
to protect the seller, saying, we're going to.
Almost forgot it, just started a little while ago.
The seller's saying, I'm not going to take it out. The seller's saying, I'm not going to take it out of the property. I'm going to leave it behind. But if somebody else really owns it or another party really owns it and they come and show up and take it out, then that's the buyer's risk and not the seller's responsibility.
Sure.
Karen, you wanted to say something?
No, I think she was talking to someone
Oh,
else.
it's talking to someone. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I would still say, put it in, right? You still want to describe all that stuff. And sometimes the lender might say, I don't want an itemized list in there. We'll just put something in, whatever chattels and fixtures are currently on the property and leave it in very general terms. And then it's a good idea for you to make sure you've got pictures or video evidence of what's there. So if something goes missing, but someone can only take it out if they have the right to take it out. Okay. Like the homeowner, if he fully owned the fridge, can't just decide, okay, there's an order kicking me out of this property, but I'm going to take the fridge with me. Okay. They can't do that. Okay. So when they get an order to evict the homeowner, the owner's got to leave everything behind other than their clothes and, and furniture and stuff like that, things that aren't supposed to go with it. But usually the chattels will. Sometimes properties are sold power of sale without any appliances too. Okay, and they allow the owner to take their appliances out. And so you're buying it, but they should make that clear in the agreement of purchase and sale that we're not leaving it. That's why it's good. You push to get a list of exactly what's staying and what should be included. Okay, but know that there's still a risk to the buyer even with that. Okay, now just another point to make here, if it's a condominium that's being sold in power of sale, any liens for arrears for common expenses that are registered are not deleted from title. So as a lawyer, we're going to deal with it a different way. We see that there's liens, there is a lien registered and there are arrears. We're going to have to deal with it another way because someone's got to pay off that lien claimant. Okay. So that's something we're going to try and negotiate, but the seller sometimes is going to give you a hard time. They don't want to pay for it. There might be plenty of proceeds from the sale to pay that off. Okay. But so we're going to get it off because they're actually being paid, but they're not going to be cut out. Okay. Another thing that could be registered on title is a certificate of pending litigation. So what that is, if someone sues somebody and the real estate is involved, they could register a certificate of pending litigation on title to effectively block someone from the owner from selling the property while the ownership or there's an interest in the property that's up for dispute and is the subject of litigation. So they may have registered a certificate of pending litigation on title to the property. So it's not automatically deleted just because the property is sold under power of sale, but it might be. But usually it requires a court order authorizing that to come off title, or the consent of the party that actually registered it. So I consent to you getting that off title, but it's not the power of sale itself that wipes that out and cleans title. Bottom line for that, not that important for you to know. It's important if you have the right lawyer closing the transaction and knows what to do with these things, and gets, and can get it, things like that off title to make sure the buyer gets clean title. And it's not just the buyer that wants clean title, it's the buyer's lender that wants to get clean title and make sure that if there was a suit of pending litigation, we get that off title. If there was a lien on title, we want to get that off title because we want clean title. Okay, so important to know that there's all these factors that come into play. So I want to bring the conversation back to a little bit to where I started from, in terms of whether it's a bargain, but also for you to understand another thing. So just the rights of subsequent owners. So I gave you a scenario. Let's say there's a first mortgage lender and then there's a second mortgage lender on title to the property. So there's a pretty good chance if the first mortgage loan is in default, that there's probably a default on the second mortgage as well. If there's a third mortgage, there might be a default there. So everybody, if they're a defaulting mortgagee, has the right to sell this property. The first mortgage lender can sell it, the second mortgage lender can sell it, the third mortgage lender can sell it, as long as they issue notice of sale to everybody behind them and they start the process. They could sell it, and sometimes it's the first to get an agreement that can sell the property. What happens a lot of times, though, if you're a second or third mortgage lender, and oftentimes those will be private lenders because there aren't a lot of institutional lenders that'll go on as a second or a third, in order to protect their position, sometimes they want to get control of the process. So they'd say, I don't want the first mortgage lender to sell it, even though I have the right to challenge them and make sure they got fair market. I think I'm going to get cut out. I'm not going to get all my money back. I'd rather take over the process. Maybe I want to fix up the property. Maybe I want to stage it differently. Maybe I think I have more of an ability to sell it for a better price, and I got a better chance of getting all my money out. So I want to sell it under my second mortgage instead of the first mortgage lender. So that second mortgage has the right to go pay everything that's owed to the first mortgage lender to put them back into good standing. Okay, it doesn't have to mean they have to pay off the full mortgage. They could do that, but they have to pay what's outstanding, all the arrears of interest, penalties, legal costs, put it back into good standing, and they can continue making ongoing mortgage payments if they want to the first mortgage lender. So the first mortgage keeps going. It's now in good standing. But the second mortgage is in default, and any money they lay out to pay to put the first in good standing, they can add that to their second mortgage debt, and then they could sell the property. Okay, they could also buy out the first mortgage, pay everything off on the first mortgage, and instead of saying we've now paid you in full, instead of saying we want a discharge from you, TD, because we paid you all your principal and interest and costs, but instead of a discharge, I'd rather you assign your mortgage to me, the second lender, because you've already issued a notice of sale. So I want to sell the property under your power of sale because you've already issued a notice of sale. So I just want to continue. So the second mortgagee has certain rights to do that. Oftentimes, what comes into play is parties are very careful about the obligation to have to account for everybody behind them in the process. So some people want to take over the process to protect and recover because they think they might recover more of their money. And some people are reluctant to do that because they don't want to account to everybody behind them. So there's a lot of factors that come into play when properties are being sold under power of sale, in addition to just the rights of parties. So I just wanted to let you know that part of it, because we're going to see a lot more, and we're already seeing a lot more of private mortgage lending and people getting a second mortgage. Some people get second mortgage just to have funds to put their first mortgage in good standing. But those second mortgages are extremely expensive and the interest rates are high. And usually they're for a short term. Before you know it, those come up for renewal. And a lot of times it's those second mortgages that go into default way before a first mortgage because they're so expensive. So the best advice you can give to a client a lot of times that are in that pickle of being on the borderline for being in default or are likely to default on one or more mortgages it's really time for them to sell that property. That's probably the best advice that you could give to them. Okay, because if they keep going back, and we have clients that keep doing it, they just refinance, and every time they do that, they pay through the nose lenders fees and high interest rates, and it's short term, and they pay legal fees for putting a mortgage on for 6 months, and they got to refinance, they got to pay legal fees again, and they got to pay another lender fee, and they're paying really high interest rates, and it's just a matter of time until they go into default on that. So it might make sense to do it for a period of time if it's to buy them a little bit of time in order to sell the property. Okay, or if they really think they need some time because they've got money coming free to them from somewhere else and they can get rid of those mortgages. But for a lot of people, the best advice you can give them is protect yourself and whatever equity you still have in this property by selling it, and control the process, pay off the lenders that are ahead of you. Hopefully there's still some equity there for you, and then you'll use that equity and go buy something else. Because if they go into default, their equity is going to get eroded so fast by this power of sale process. Okay, the lawyers that deal in selling power of sale, they charge a lot of fees for dealing, for closing a transaction under power of sale, for issuing statements of claim, for getting vacant possession. There's those fees. There's outstanding property taxes. There might be lien claimants. There's all these other parties. They're paying a lot of money. They're going to recover all that money. It's all going to erode the equity that the homeowner is going to get. So you've got to have a proper analysis done. Some of the best advice you can give them as an agent is it's time to sell your property, and we'll find you something else that you'll like, that'll be more affordable, but let's do it while you still have this equity that you can buy the next property with. Because if you keep playing this game, it's going to use up all your equity, and you're not going to be able to buy another property afterwards. It's just, you're going to be underwater. So that brings me back to the other part that I want to address before we close this off, and that's the original question. And by the way, this is Nicole, one of our clerks, if you haven't dealt with her, and she did the last presentation with me. And that's why she's part of this side that we did a power of sale. And she's fabulous. For any of you that have dealt with her before, she knows more about so many things than I do. Don't tell her I said that, even though this is being recorded, because I'll deny it. Is it a bargain to buy under power of sale? Now, a lot of times, a lender might sell it a little bit more than market value. So you might be getting it a little bit more than the purchase price. They might be selling a little bit. So you might save a little bit on the purchase price. But remember, a lender's got to be really careful because they can be challenged. So they can't really be substantially below what a true fair market value would be. So they might be a little bit below in order to get rid of this property, but they can't go extremely below because they're going to be challenged on it. So it's going to be something close to a fair market value. But then any buyer, in addition to, even if they get a bit of a bargain, they think they're getting a bargain on the purchase price, they have to be aware that they have to have a budget on a resale property to spend, because there might be all kinds of defects in there and warts and things like that we don't really know about. And they may have to pay to fix things up after closing because they're going to have no recourse against their seller to go back to it. So that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but it means you should have that discussion with your client and make sure they can afford that. If things pop up after closing that they didn't know about, because it turns out there is a leak in the basement that no one knew about. The homeowner might know about it, but it looks like it hasn't leaked for a while. Maybe they painted over it, and after closing, there's a flood down there. Well, that's the buyer's issue. They can't go back to the lender. They can't go back to the homeowner. But what you certainly don't want them to do is go back after you that said, well, you didn't tell me that I took all this risk in buying a property under power of sale. So make sure you do your job and protect yourself and have that conversation with them and make sure that that's clear, because there are certain risks associated with it. And the other big risk is, so they're buying it as is, whereas, so they have to have that budget available just in case to fix it up. So even if they got a break on the purchase price, chances are they're going to spend that money, the difference between that and what a true fair market price might be, in what they're going to have to put into the property. So they might not be getting that bargain that they really thought they were getting just because they got a better purchase price, because they'll probably put the money back in other ways to the property. And then it's also that risk of, okay, you chose this property, it's closing April 27th, you passed on other resales that also close April 27th, but because it's priced under power of sale, it may not close on April 27th. You might be all ready. You might have all your financing ready. You might have everything ready, but the seller might say, hey, I can't close yet because someone challenged me, the process in court. We got to go to court over this, or we haven't been able to get an order to get the vacant possession yet. And the owner's not leaving, so we can't close yet. We need 30 days, we need 60 days, we need 90 days to go to court and make sure we get them out or resolve these issues. So there's that risk. So there's a dollar sign to those risks as well. So you have to be aware of. That's why I always say, is it the bargain that a buyer really thinks it is? Sometimes it really is. Sometimes it's not quite the bargain because there's these other factors. So that's sort of the point that I want to make with it. And the last point I want to make to you is the seller has the right to sell the property at the time that there's a default. They issue their notice of default to the homeowner. They have to wait 35 days before they can take any further action. So that homeowner can do what they want. Homeowner can sell the property during the 35 days. Homeowner can redeem. But once the 35 days is gone, the seller can then market the property, accept an agreement purchase sale, and go ahead and continue with the process. Okay. Now, if that default happened to be in January 2023, when the market really sucks, the seller can go sell the property in that market. There's no obligation for the seller or for anybody to challenge the seller. Say, well, you shouldn't have sold it in January of 2023 because you can only get $900,000 because the market was quiet. It's winter, everybody's freezing, no one's around. But if you would have waited until May and sold it then, in a normal spring market, you could have got 100, or you could have got 100 or 1.1, sorry, $1.1 million for it, or $1 million for it. You would have got more money if you would have waited and sold it then. A seller under power of sale has no obligation to wait for a better market. They have the right to sell the property as soon as their 35 days are up. Okay, now they could choose to wait if they want, because maybe if they say, oh, if we sell it in January, we may not get all our money out to cover our first mortgage. But if we wait till the spring, we'll get more money. Chances are we'll get more money. So let's wait and we'll sell it then. But they have no obligation. That's up to the lender. A second mortgagee, a third mortgagee, the homeowner can't bring an application to a lender saying, hey, you shouldn't have sold it in January. You should have waited until May, because everybody knows the market's better in May and there's more people out there and you probably would have got a better price. No, they can sell it whenever they want, as soon as in the market that exists, as soon as their notice of sale period, which is the 35 days, expires. Okay, then it's up to them to decide if it's better. That's why sometimes a second mortgage lender, a third mortgage lender might want to take over the process too. Hey, I don't want the first mortgage to sell it in January. I'd rather put it in good standing, because if he sells in January, I know I'm going to take a haircut on this. I'm not going to get all my money back. But if I sell it in May, I've got a better chance to get a higher price, take over the process. So maybe I'll sell it in May and maybe I get more money. First mortgage still gets all their money, all their interest and everything, but it leaves more for me as the second mortgage lender to recover my money and my interest and my penalties, etc. Okay, so there's a lot of factors that go into it. So with that, I'm going to throw it back to you, Sabiha, in case there's any questions from anybody.
Hi guys, you can unmute and go ahead and ask questions, if any at all. Jeff had asked if he said, "Hi David, are there not certain time notices to each step along the way?"
Are there not certain time notices? Yes. Well, that's what I was just talking about. They issue a notice of sale. Okay. So when the lender issues notice of sale, the notice of sale basis, there's a mortgage registered against this property on such a date, and it's in default as of whatever the default date is, and the following is what's owing. Here's the principal, here's the interest, here's the penalties, here's any other money they put in, here's the legal costs for issuing notice of sale. So we need X dollars in order to pay this off. So that notice of sale is issued to the registered owner of the property, who's the borrower. It's issued to any spouse that they might have, and it's issued and served, not issued, it's served upon. There's rules under the mortgage of how it's to be served. It's usually registered mail, and because you need evidence that these parties were all served. And anybody that's subsequent to in interest gets served with that notice, because they all have a right to redeem. Okay, and the lender is saying, this is how much I need, and unless I get that amount by 35 days from now, I'm going to go ahead and sell the property. So that's basically what the notice says. And then once they issue that, they have to wait. They can't do anything. They can't take any steps during that 35-day notice period. But the second that 35 days are up, if nobody redeemed, then they can start marketing the property, and they can do what they want. They can accept an agreement of purchase, and they can list, accept an agreement of purchase, sale, etc. Okay. I hope that answers that question.
Right. Anybody else having any questions? David, I just want to ask you on the flip side. So we obviously wouldn't have so many listings that would come our way that are under this banner, but in terms of us selling them for our buying agents, I just want to know, like, what if I know that one of our realtors was faced with it, and he's actually online right now, Jerome. What if the client realizes that they are not able to maintain this property and decides to sell it to us? And at that point, there's a delay in the payments, and the bank comes back and says, we want to do power of sale, but we already have an agreement of purchase and sale. What are the rights of our clients at that
Yes.
point?
Sometimes it becomes a race to sell, like who's going to sell first. So if you're in a situation where you're on that defaulting owner's side of it, a lot of times it's best to be upfront with the lender and say, hey, our intention is fully to sell it. We're already staging it. We're already cleaning it up. We're already decluttering. We've already signed a listing agreement. Our intention is to sell it. Will you back off and hold off, or you give us a period of time where we can try and sell it? And sometimes a lender will agree to that and say, fine, you're already that far into the process. We're going to give you so much time, but other than that, we're going ahead. Now, if you actually have something under contract, you for sure should go to the lender and say, hey, we signed agreement purchase and sale. It's closing April 27th. Please hold off your process. Don't sell it, because we got it. Here's some, you'll see, you'll get all your money back. And you give them all the information and show it. And then you get confirmation from that lender, usually through their lawyer, saying, fine, we will agree not to do anything as long as it closes, but you got, make sure you keep us informed if anything changes, and blah, blah, blah. So they might be really happy that the property is being sold, and they got a way to get their money out, as long as you can show them that it's real, that it's not a conditional offer, or if it is, that they see what the conditions are, but the conditions have to be waived in a couple of days. And if not, sure, lender, go ahead. But if we get these conditions waived, we've already got an agreement. So save your time and energy, and don't have to do it, because we've already got the property sold. Okay. But if it hasn't been sold yet, and you're saying, we're going to go to the market, we're going to sell, the lender doesn't have to agree to any of that. As long as the lender, lenders will want to issue the notice of sale, let the clock start running. And the end of the 35 days, if you haven't sold the property yourself and closed, then they're going to start their process. So the best thing is, keep a lender informed. If you during that 35 days, even if you sell to somebody, or before you accept that, or you might go back to the lender, hey, we've got someone who's going to buy it. Here's the price. You'll see, you'll get all your money out, but it's not closing until after that 35-day period. Will you hold off to allow this to go through? Okay. If it closes before the 35 days, the lender doesn't have an option. The lender's got to just accept the money that the lender is going to receive, because the property was sold. Okay. If the closing is going to be after that 35 days, the lender can always start their process. So you want to try and go back to the lender, through the lawyer involved, to say, hey, we've got something under contract here. It's closing May 15th. Please hold off. And, because, 2 weeks from now, you'll get all your money. as opposed to you just starting to market the property and sell it, and you're not going to get your money until who knows when. But here you can see there's a clear path to getting all your money, and sometimes you'll get cooperation that way.
David, I have a question. It's Regina. What happens if, let's say, there is a first lender and then there is a second lender, and you're in a default with the second lender or a private lender as a second mortgage, but you're totally fine with the first one? What happens then? So because you're okay with the first one, does the second one has the right to sell the property, or what happens then?
Yeah, if the first mortgage is in good standing, but the second mortgage is in default, the second mortgage lender issues a notice of sale to the owner, the spouse of the owner, anybody that's behind him. If there's a third mortgage or a lien registered or any other, anybody's behind them, they get notice of the sale. And then they can go ahead and sell the property. When they sell the property, they have to pay out the first mortgage. The same way as if the homeowner themselves sold the property, then they write to the first mortgage lender saying, hey, we're closing May 15th. Please provide us with a discharge statement. First mortgagee provides a discharge statement. This is what's owing on our mortgage. And then from the proceeds of sale, the first mortgage gets paid out in full. Okay.
Okay, so it's the
first
same
mortgage is going to
way.
get paid.
So it's the same way as it would be. So every single lender, it has the same kind of rights. It's just once there's not enough money that has to be paid off, the first one has to be paid off first, and then all the second one and the third one and so forth.
Right. Right.
Oh, okay.
So when you issue notice of sale, you have to give notice to anybody behind you in interest to the property. The second mortgage lender wouldn't give notice to the first mortgage because the first mortgage is in good standing. First mortgage is going to get paid out when the property gets sold anyways.
Yes.
Okay. So they don't give notice to them. It's anybody behind that gets, that gets the notice. And sometimes, we've seen it many times, there's 3 mortgages registered in a property and the property gets sold and the first mortgage lender might get everything, their interest, their costs, everything gets paid. Second mortgage lender sometimes gets 50% or 75%, and they don't get the full amount. Sometimes the third mortgage lender gets 0. They get cut out completely because the property was underwater.
And how does it work when it comes to the priority of the payments? Let's say if someone didn't pay the taxes, if someone didn't pay maintenance, let's say in a condo, and then on the top of that, they do have a first, I know it's like, I'm exaggerating, but
yep. No, that happens all the time. It's not an exaggeration. So if there's outstanding property taxes, for example, that will get paid from the closing proceeds, okay? Because that would even take priority ahead of the first mortgage.
Okay.
But it'll get paid out. And it might be the first mortgage lender sometimes, if it's an institution, sometimes they'll just go ahead and pay the outstanding property taxes because they'll recover it. They just add it to the debt that's owed to them, and they'll recover it as part of the power of sale process.
And now, in case if you are, let's say, purchasing, would that be some kind of thing that you should worry about? Let's say if there is a huge amount, or do you have access of how much debt the actual seller is? Because if you as a listing agent will cooperate with a cooperating agent, and you will not receive your portion of a commission, do you have to worry whether like if I'm acting for the buyer and you decide that yes, you will cooperate with me, does whoever is listing and they're cooperating with us, let's say, and we are the buyer representative, should we worry whether they're going to have enough money, or should the listing agent worry if they're going to have enough money to cooperate with us?
Well, yeah, like the commission works the same way on a power of sale as a resale. And usually they're paying commission. They want agents to come and they want to cooperate. Okay. Now, usually when they're selling it, they'll figure out, how much they can afford, because if the first mortgage lender is not going to get all their money back, usually they're still going to agree to pay a commission, and the first mortgage lender is just not going to get all their money back. Okay, because they got to pay a commission in order to get it sold. So usually you get protected with the commission, like just in the normal course. Okay. And usually they're doing that math before they put it up for sale. They're not going to say or sign a cooperating agreement, say, you know, we're only paying you a commission if there's money left over to pay you. Usually there's an agreement that you're getting paid. And if anybody's taking a haircut on it, if there isn't enough to pay out the full first mortgage with all their interest and costs, then it's the first mortgage lender that's taking the haircut on it. Because even the first mortgage, like, they're going to have to pay their legal fees, they're going to pay the commission, they're going to pay outstanding property taxes, because those are generally ahead of them in the process in order to get it sold. And then they'll get whatever's left to cover what they're owed. But, you know, most times, if it's just a first mortgage lender, there's usually enough value in the property, they're going to get all their money out and pay the commission. If it's usually the owner that's getting their equity eroded, or if there's a second or a third mortgage, they might be at risk to not get all their money out. Okay, and if there's no second, but it's usually the homeowner that's at risk for losing their equity. But because usually there's enough money, because generally, you know, first mortgage lenders are not giving loans for 100% of the value of the property. It's 60%, 70%, or it was 60% at the time they lent it 3 or 4 years ago or 5 years ago, and the values have gone up. So usually there's some equity there. Okay, and it's only when they start, you know, the owners, oh, I'm using that equity and now I got to put a second mortgage on, and they're, you know, so they're cutting into their own equity because they're granting additional mortgages to people. But they're the ones that ultimately end up at risk. Usually the first mortgage lender is protecting and going to get all their money out. And they should protect your commission. You should be able to get your commission in the normal course.
Okay, thank you.
Now, Sabiha, I know we've scheduled a couple other sessions in the near future. I don't remember offhand what the next one is, but I know you sent out a schedule, so take a look, because we've got some other topics.
Yeah, great webinars coming up. Yeah, and guys, I think it is it's a harder property to sell, so just kind of beware and keep these pointers in, you know, your back pocket if you ever cross it. And like David said, like, you know, have a lawyer represent your clients that can really look into the APS and give enough time for a lawyer's review. Maybe it's prudent to put in that clause of buyer's review, buyer's lawyer review
Yes.
prior to the agreement being confirmed, more
Yes.
so than inspection clause, because maybe inspection is not something that may be helpful for your client in this scenario, but a lawyer's review may be.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a great point. The other point I just want to make back just on your commission, because I know that's really important to all of you. That's how you make a living. And I don't want anybody to be discouraged again. I don't want to be discouraged from people not doing a power of sale because there's these differences or these risks. But also remember, in terms of your commission, you only get paid upon successful completion. So if at the last second somebody redeems this property and it terminates your agreement to purchase and sell, you don't get any commission, even though you did everything right and you worked hard and everything. So now you're stuck with your buyer. You got to go with your buyer and find another property. And when they do find another property, you'll get a commission then. So you just have to know that. So sometimes it's more work, or, you know, because there's always that risk. Now, it's not that many properties that do get redeemed, but some do. So you just have to know that there's always that risk. And if it doesn't close, even though everything was done, the buyer was completely ready to close, you did everything you were supposed to do, and the property gets redeemed, there's no commission payable. You're starting to find another property for your buyer, and you'll eventually earn a commission when they buy and close. Okay.
All right, great. Okay, thank you, everyone, and especially thank you, David, for doing this yet again for us. Have a good afternoon, and do look out for the other sessions that are coming up. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.